Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, what I wanted to do was take a look at Chris Watt's astrology chart. This is his birth chart. And what I did was I also added the transits, meaning where the planets were on August 13, 2018, the night or the day of the murders. Now, I'm not going to get the exact time, obviously, but I put the transits just to see where the planets were around him and see if there's anything I can see, or obviously some of you may be able to see if you're into astrology. And I always find it very interesting. Now, a couple things I want to say before I put up the chart and get to work. First thing is, I want to remind everybody, if you are mean or call someone names, you will be instantly, there's no backs on that. You'll be instantly booted from the channel. Anybody that says anything derogatory to another person, or if you start saying stuff like this is crap or whatever, you're going to get deleted. So don't even bother. Don't even bother coming on and saying that. Really what we're looking for is just a sense of community here. And so let's take a look. I'm going to just go to my handy dandy little share button. I'm hoping it works. We'll see if it does. Let's see. Okay, so this is my version. Yes, it is. This is my version of Chris Watt's birth chart. And I did find his time of birth. So what we're looking at here, when you look at an astrology chart like this, for those of you that don't know, we're actually looking at it's actually, if you can imagine a map of the sky, it's like a blueprint of a building in a funny way. So what we're looking at, when we look over here, and I'm going to bring the cursor right over here, when you see AC, that is your ascendant. That's what's ascending at the time of your birth. And in this case, he's Taurus rising, which makes a lot of sense. Taurus is very, solid. They're like little bulls. They're kind of like, they have a real solid look to them. They appear very solid. Now, your rising sign is how you appear to the world. So he is going to appear that way. Now, what's also interesting about his chart, of course, there's a couple things I want to explain. The DC is what's descending. So when we look at Scorpio descending, something that also comes forward to me there, and that's the Scorpio symbol. I'm going to try and get right there. Okay. So when we see that, what's happening is that's what's kind of descending. Now, when we say that, notice that this line here separates the chart. This is what's going on underneath, and this is the outer world. So it's kind of like your inner world and your outer world. So when we look at these planets, and now these on the outside, just to let you know, in green here, that's what was in the sky at the time that the murders were committed. So taking a look at his chart, you can see right here, this is the sun, this little circle. This is the sun, and you can see it says 25 here. Now down here it tells you it's 25 Taurus. So that means he's a Taurus, okay? So his sun sign is Taurus. Now, what's interesting, of course, is that when you look at Mercury, he's also a Taurus Mercury. That's how you think. That's your thought patterns. The sun is how you occur to the world. So, he is pretty much what you see, all right? Now, bear with me. It's also in the first house. Now, I want to explain something about these houses. You can see there's 12 of them around here. One of the things I want to say, if you look at 1, 2, 3, you could see these. I want you to think of these houses as kind of like, I want to say a multicolored window, right? So that first house is going to have the shading of Aries, I've got to get things started, got to move quick, make impulsive decisions, right? And here it is, his sun is on his ascendant in his first house. English, that means that he's someone that very much wants to do what he wants to do, and he's going to get it. He's going to get believe it or not, he may not occur that way, but he does. This is someone that really does get what he wants. Now, it's in his first house, so that's very Aries. I got to have it now. Now, I'm going to also mention to you here, this little planet here, that's Chiron. Chiron is a planet that says what doesn't kill you will make you stronger, right? And it's actually conjuncting his Mars. Now let's talk about Mars as the planet And I want to go through the planets in order, but I will say that Mars is how you direct your energy. A lot of astrologers will tell you it's sexual energy. I say it's the way in which you direct your energy. So if we look at that, Chiron really is something that it becomes a very powerful lesson in one's life. So if you look at his Mars conjuncting his Chiron, this is someone that is going to make impulsive decisions in his life to do something, and then it's going to kill him or it's going to make him stronger. Take a look at the impulsive decisions. Now, when I say impulsive, he went against his family to marry Shanann. He impulsively, if you will, gave up his desire to do the race car thing. And that was something also that, if you remember, his family was saying that was what he was about to do, and then he gave it all up, right? Now, I'm not making a judgment about anybody here. I want to be very clear. I'm looking at patterns based on his chart, okay? So when we look at this together, when you see Chiron like that, conjunct Mars, that really tells you that an action of his is either going to destroy him or make him strong. And of course, ultimately, one of his actions destroyed him. Now, what's interesting about that is, where is this? It's in Gemini. Now, what I also find very interesting is he really doesn't have a lot of planets in Gemini. I mean, it could appear that he's a Gemini, but he's actually really more Taurus if you look at his sun in Taurus, but his Mercury also in Taurus. By the way, when you have a sun and Mercury in the same sign, that is really, technically, people call it different things, but technically that really is the same sign. It means you're a true Taurus. If his Mercury was in, I want to say Aries, that would put him on the cusp of Aries. Now, you've heard some astrologers, if you've listened to other people, they've talked about decans, and decans of an astrology chart, if you look here, it says 3. And if you look at his sun, it says 25. Now, these are both in Taurus. Here's your Taurus. The sun is in the 3rd decan. The Mercury here is in the 1st decan. Now, what does that tell you? Well, the 1st decan is always Taurus. The 2nd decan is always going to be Virgo. And the 3rd decan is going to be Capricorn. Now, why is that? Why am I saying that? Because those are your earth signs. And of course, Taurus is earth, and each decan is going to be an earth sign with Taurus. In a fire sign, there'll be 3 fire signs. Let me put this into English for you. The 1st decan here in his Mercury, Taurus, it means it's kind of almost it's a matchup. So he's going to be bulling ahead in his thoughts. This guy gets focused or fixated on something and he gets it done. That would make him very good at some of the things he did, like focusing and concentrating and remembering things. That is a very good thing. However, when we look at it being in the 1st decan and his sun being in the 3rd, interestingly, in that 3rd decan, what begins to happen is his sun becomes like a Capricorn. So ultimately, that Capricorn that is kind of putting him out there in the world, if you will, and what he really has worked for, ultimately he has become famous for something that is not good. So I'm going to look at this in a minute, because one of the things I want to point out here is the 12th house. What I've learned, and my mother's an astrologer, so I really kind of learned a lot in the old days and studied some of the old ways. And one of the things that I picked up early on was the 12th house, which is, as I was mentioning, look how wide it is here. This width, it goes into 2 signs. I have found that the 12th house planets are often things you came here to complete, karmic planets. Now, what's interesting is his moon conjuncts his Venus in Aries. I'm telling you, my dad was an Aries Venus, and I'm going to tell you, Aries moon. I love my dad, but man, he had tantrums. But what's interesting, because that would be what you like, is that kind of like fiery thinking, ways to get things done, very impulsive. What I also see there is even though it falls in his 12th house, it's Aries. So it really is incomplete emotional matters. And really, in this life, he may not or may have completed what he really wanted. And we kind of know that on some level, he really failed at what he was here to do. Now, when I say that, when we look at Moon conjunct Venus, what did he really want? What is that starting over, right? Aries is starting over. Moon is your feelings, like, you know, how you feel and what makes you feel good, right? And of course, Aries is fast, right? It's fast, 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 fast. It's in that 12th house of ruminating. So you may make a decision or emotionally want to do something, but you get stuck in the ruminating. And when it conjuncts Venus like that, that tells me that Venus is what you like and the kinds of friends you like. So he would be someone that would have fast friends, intense friendships, and then they would move on. This is someone that would be very difficult to pin down for any length of time. Now, as I say that, notice all of those planets in his 12th house. Now, I'm going to let someone else comment on the north and south nodes, because I know someone's going to come on and go, oh, the north node, the south node. So I want to give someone else an opportunity who knows astrology well to do that as well. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because I'm not going to cover it in this just because of the nature of this. But let's take a look here, go a little deeper. Mars is the way your energy is. Now, Mars is in Gemini. And that's like, he goes in two different directions. He's got two different things going on at all times. I have never known a Mars in Gemini who didn't have either two jobs, two loves, two different things that they were completely different that they were passionate about. So you're going to look at that in terms of a split in his life. A couple other things I want to point out. Now, Saturn, very interestingly, if we go over here to the 6th house. The 6th house is Virgo, right? It represents Virgo. But it also is, it's small pets. It's also clothes and the way we wear them. But take a look what's going on here. See that little, you can barely see it probably if you're looking at it on the screen here. These little R's mean it's retrograde. This guy, and these are outer planets. Now what does outer planet mean? Well, these are generational planets. These are not planets that are specific to Chris Watts. These are planets that you'll see in a house for anywhere between 3 to 20 years. I mean, looking at these planets, and you could see all of these outer planets are in retrograde. So for me, when I see that much outer turmoil in the world in retrograde, it's going to definitely affect what's going on in the person. That doesn't make them a killer. That doesn't make them, mean they're crazy or anything like that. In his case, all of that energy working behind the scenes can have an effect. Now let's take a look one more time. Remember I said to you, 12th house. Here's that 12th house. And I know if you've watched my channel for any length of time, some of you have said, what do you mean by what opposes exposes? Let's take a look at that, because I specifically mean that in astrology. So when we look at, for example here, the moon, okay? Now, by the way, this is by house, not sign. What do I mean? Okay. So when we look at Aries, the sign opposite of Aries is going to be Libra, right? So these signs are opposite, as is Taurus opposes Scorpio, which is a lot of times why people say, oh, these two aren't supposed to get along because they're opposite, but opposites attract. And sometimes they balance each other very well. In the case of Chris Watts, one of the things I want to point out here is he's got this Saturn, and notice that Saturn is just almost eking up into his 7th house. 7th house are our relationships. 6th house is more our appearance and small pets. So what is going on here, when we look at this, and I'm looking at it on the screen, when we look at Saturn and we go directly across in this line, let's look at the line directly across. Now, take Saturn, you see it says 24, and it's in Scorpio, go directly across, and you look at Taurus. 25 as the ascendant. What opposes exposes. Now, the sun is who you are in the world. It's how you operate, how you are. And what's very interesting here is when it opposes Saturn like that, it makes, because remember it opposes it, so it's exposing what he did and didn't do in his life. So as soon as he got caught, it exposed the true him. He couldn't hide anymore because Saturn, all the work he didn't do in his life got exposed. Even to the point of Shanann running his online business, right? She faked his whole Thrive business so she could have someone under her and make more money. So truth be told, he really was going to all the time be someone behind the scenes. This isn't a guy who really was destined to great things. Sorry. He was somebody that, if you look at the opposition here, when you have something opposing you like that, and Saturn is the planet of hard work, it's karma, and it's rewards. So a lot of times when people have Saturn going on in their life, you know, and I think this is an important thing to say, Saturn is really, and I feel this, it can be a great planet. It can be like, you know, a lot of people go, oh, Saturn return, you know. Now notice his Saturn is up here, so it's actually gone past here's his natal. So he already had his Saturn return. And guess when I think he had his Saturn return? About the time he got married. It's not great to marry or have children necessarily when you're in your Saturn return, because that is huge, huge, huge karma, and it's things that make it difficult. Now, here's something interesting. Saturn is the ruling planet of Capricorn, and Shanann's Capricorn. Take a look at the fact that Saturn, at the time of the murder, Saturn in the sky was conjunct Neptune, okay? And what does that mean? Neptune is the planet of fantasy and imagination and being misguided. So he took that Saturn energy in some kind of fantasy, thinking he was doing the right thing, and he killed his family. But look at this. Shanann is a Capricorn. So what is that telling you? He annihilated her and that Saturn on her sun. Basically, it's by sign. I don't know her exact degree because I don't have her chart up. But that Saturn going over her in his chart, what does that do? That really makes her more famous than him. Now, I want to make this clear. When I see Saturn outside, like as you see here in the transits, right? These are transits. It's not in his natal. It's not sitting right here, but it's over here. And it's transiting Capricorn, which is Shanann's natal sign. Now, what happened was when a Saturn revisits, when it sits on someone else's sun, it can have more of an impact to the person whose sun sign it is. So let's say, for example, we throw Shanann's sun sign in here. His Saturn act, his follow through from his fantasy will actually impact her more, but it will also bring her to bigger heights of fame. So what that's doing is when you look at that planetary influence, what you think you're doing, right? So he thought in this Saturn, he's like, yeah, this is, and there's his fantasy. That's in his natal chart. And natal means what you're given in your birth. That's kind of like your genes or your DNA, so to speak, but it's your spiritual astrological DNA. So a blueprint of your life is actually what astrology is. It's like a blueprint of the sky when you were born. So when we take these planets and we put them onto a chart, it's like, how are you going to build your house? How are you going to destroy your house? And what is your house going to look like? So let's take a look. Now, as we look here at the fourth house, now see here, this says 4. Now your fourth house, often what's in there, notice it's absent here. He's got nothing in there. Your fourth house is often the relationships you form. That's often the relationships that are lifetime relationships are often the first marriage is often in the 4th house. The second is often in the, I want to say, the 8th house. And then the third is in the 12th house, and it goes around. Now, when we look at it that way, we can really see that in here, in his house, in his home, there was Sun and Mercury in his fourth, I want to say in his 4th house here. It's transiting. Now, that would make him feel like cock of the walk, right? That would be because that's really shining in his 4th house. It would make him feel free in his home, which is exactly what he was feeling. He was feeling like a free guy because Leos are very generous, right? So his energy at that point would be very generous. And of course, when NK talked about his house, she talked about how big it was and how fabulous it was. Well, that's 4th house. And that is because it's empty there. It's not really who he is. It's not really what's going on with him. Now, one of the things that we want to do is we want to take this chart, and then we want to put, and if I had her birth, I could tell you, but what we want to do is then we want to put Shanann, and we want to see who they were together, and then we want to put NK and see who they were together, because who these people are together is going to influence the energy that they send out to the world. Now, coming back to him, let's look at Jupiter for a minute here, because Jupiter is really the planet of luck. And it's in his 10th house. So what that tells me is, you know, he did have a lot of career luck for him. You know, he had a lot of options with his career. It's also an Aquarius, which is very, well, it's the water bearer, but it is not a water sign. It's an air sign. Don't mistake that. And it's also fixed. So when it's fixed, it's stubborn. It's actually strong, and it's opposing his 4th house. So what that's telling me is what he really wished for, like what he wanted to create, was not what he was going to create. So he never really got to live in that house, which is interesting because that for me, that 4th house being empty gives me that impression. Now, 5th house is children, and it's also creativity. And take a look what's cresting on his 5th house. What is the sign cresting? That's Virgo. And no offense to any Virgos, because I'm Virgo rising, so I can tell you that. But what that tells me about him is that, first of all, Virgo's the virgin. There are no children. That's barrenness. There's no children in this house of children. And what's interesting there is you could see the moon at that time was in Virgo. So it was really for him in the passage of his chart, it was almost a decisive, because if you think about Virgo, it's really not a very emotional, touchy-feely sign, is it? They're very controlled. They're very organized. Look at that organized emotional state around the 5th house. 5th house, the issues of the 5th house are children, creativity, and relationship, but not the kind of relationship we think of as marriage. That 7th house, that's over here. What it really is flings, romance, quick relationships. So his moon was constricted here by, if you will, Virgo, and that Virgo wiped everything out. So when we look at it that way, you can start to see how some of the planetary influences were really lending themselves to what he was doing. Now, one of the other things I want to make a note of here, and this is a kind of an interesting thing that I have found consistently in charts, and this is something that I don't think you'll hear in a lot of places. Look here, this is Pluto. All right. And Pluto is a complete historical change planet. When Pluto comes in, it's going to change the world. When it moved energetically in our lives from Sagittarius to, and it did a number of years ago now, it moved into Capricorn, the whole structure of the world changed. So here, and by the way, when it's like when the Berlin Wall fell, not that, but another time, that was a shift of Pluto as well. So we're really looking at Pluto as a major component in someone's chart in terms of generationally, the impact they will have, or that the world will have on them. I have never seen, now this doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I have never seen Pluto in a seventh house that did not mean death of a spouse. I have always seen it mean death of a spouse, loss of a spouse, early divorce, something, a loss or a death to your spouse. Now, what's fascinating here, it is in his sixth house. This is the house. But by sign, what's cresting the seventh house is Scorpio. So that Scorpio, even though it's mostly Sagittarius in that seventh house, the house is considered the house of Scorpio here because Scorpio is cresting it. Even though here we have, obviously Neptune, fantasy, Uranus, sudden movement, sudden change. That is the sudden change to a relationship. It can happen that fast, right? That's in the seventh house. So a sudden upset to a relationship. And Pluto is in Scorpio, which is cresting that house. This is a very interesting thing because by sign, that Pluto is in his seventh house, loss of a spouse, death of a spouse. However, it's the Uranus, the sudden change. So I've got to tell you, while I feel that he, and if you look here now, and I'm not going to get too into it, but you could see, and I do feel that this was planned. I have to really tell you, I feel it was planned. I feel the date was planned. I feel he wanted to do it. And I don't think it was like, when I say this, I don't think he put the plan in motion long before, but I think it was in his mind for a long time. And I do think when we look at this here, this, just so you can get this idea, this blue line right here, this blue line between Moon and Venus, his natal, that's natural what he owns. Trine, which is a very easy energy. The trine in his chart here is between the Aries and the Sag, seventh house. So when he fell for Shanann, when he wanted that, he liked what he saw emotionally, he went for it. It was 12th house karma, but also it was a sudden choice. Like his choice, he was like, this is what I want and I want it now. That also is going to be very strongly sparked by this house assignment of Pluto. Now, let me give this to you in English. What I mean is Pluto hitting that seventh house, even just tapping it lightly, could in fact have been enough to really force the envelope. Now, here's what I want to tell you. When I look at Pluto in retrograde, all of these planets in retrograde, and I know you've heard me say on one or two other videos, I've kind of said it wasn't meant to be this, which is they weren't meant to die. Now, I know I'm saying that and people, of course it was meant to be, it happened. Well, yes, we know that. Okay, I don't want to invalidate that. However, when I look at it this way, I start looking at it and going, this was an impromptu at the same time. And also he created the death of the spouse. Now, something else that could be interesting here is that as full of life as Shanann was, I also feel that in an ironic way, this could have also meant that she may have died early on him if he'd done nothing. All right. Something else I want to point out here, that when I see this Pluto in this house, by house, right, as I'm talking about, when Pluto hits the seventh house, like I said, I've always seen it be death of a spouse. And I know I did say this to some of you earlier. I really feel that had Shanann left him and taken the children, he would have or could have, in essence, still killed his spouse, still killed NK. Because I do feel that he was building toward that. No matter what you do, these elements are there. That doesn't mean he would have. I want to be very clear. That doesn't mean everybody who has this is going to do that, okay? what it does mean is it's a strong indication of it happening. And by sign means it was forced. In other words, when Pluto's naturally in that house, in the 7th house, it often means, and I've seen this where a spouse just dies before you, but when it's in Scorpio and it's in its sign, it is in, because what happened was Pluto at one time was assigned to Mars, and it later got assigned to Scorpio. So am I saying that right? No, Pluto, sorry, I said it wrong. Scorpio was at one time assigned to Mars. So remember, that's that energy of Mars, but it was later changed to Pluto. Now, in English, that means that there's still a masculine, forceful energy around Scorpio. There also is, when we look at what's opposed here, in the 12th house, right? Very soft, very, because it's Pisces. Pisces, y'all like to sit around and drink and create. They're very like, woo, out there. So when we look at what's opposing here and how all of these things are kind of like working for and against each other, we look at like magnets, right? So an energy can be sparked by one way or the other. So a couple more things, and then I want to kind of leave this to be so we can talk about it. If you notice here, I'm going to point this out. Look how Jupiter is passing through that 6th house. It could almost be like, if you look at Jupiter in his 10th house of career, it's squaring. It's a square. Okay, let's talk about squares for a minute. Squares are tense energy. They're things that are moving against you. So his luck was not with him, thank goodness. His luck was not with him in that moment. He was actually doing something very foolish, we know that, but it was also a square to his energy. One of the other things I want to say is that people talk, when they talk astrology, about trines meaning positive energy and squares being negative. I got to tell you, I also see, when I look at people who are, I want to say, in mental institutions, I'm not talking necessarily about prisons, more in mental institutions, when I've seen people put away because they're kind of like possessed or they've lost it, I see a lot of trines. I see very few squares. Now, that means that, because if you've got all these trines, you're just kind of a follower. If you've got some squares, at least you have some gumption. But you have to look also at where his squares are and what's opposing. His Mars, which is his energy, split energy, right? On one hand, he wants to do this. On the other hand, he doesn't want to do this. And there is the Uranus, sudden change, sudden decisions opposing his Mars. Well, that's dumb, right? Because he's going to be like, I want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want. So everything he did was half planned, because it's a Gemini Mars. So it's half planned, but it's not planned fully. So, and also it's impulsive. So you can plan something, but then kind of, there was a crime a number of years ago, not that long ago, but it was a girl who wanted to jump off a bridge, and her best friend was egging her on, and she was like, I don't know, give me a second. And her best friend pushed her. Well, that's kind of what I'm talking about with a Jupiter thing of like, Jupiter with the Uranus sudden change thing. And this, it's kind of like, I want to do it, I don't want to do it, and then stupid does it, right? So the friend pushed her off the bridge and almost killed her. This is a situation where these planets kind of gave him some kind of phony idea that he could get away with it. One of the things I want to say, when we look at, and I've seen this too, when we look at sometimes mental illness too, it can also be, planetary influence can also delude us into thinking we have more energy than we do in the moment, or that we're stronger than we are. But let's just look very briefly at the final few things I see. We can see by transit. Let's look out here on the outside. See these little green things here. Saturn was in his 8th house, again, cresting the 9th, okay? So, this conjuncting, if you look at Saturn, indirect conjunction to his Neptune. English, Neptune is fantasy, Saturn is action, is do it or don't. And this is like, he did it. You know, eighth house. You know, eighth house also has that leaning of Scorpio, what's hidden, what's not revealed necessarily, a dark side of us. It can also be big business. It can also be family inheritance. The other thing that's very interesting here, guys, is legacy. There is something in his family that we don't know. And it is definitely in his family tree, because when I see this legacy like this, there's something hidden in that eighth house that nobody's talking about, because it's kind of a fantasy front, but nobody's telling you what's really going on. Now, when we go up into here, we can look at Pluto. Again, Pluto is that dramatic change. Some kind of secrets are being revealed, but look how this, see how it says 8 and 9 here? This is separating out 8th house from 9th house. So Mars was hitting, okay, and I'm looking at this here, Mars was actually, now that's his natal, Mars was actually in critical degree. Now let me explain critical degree to you. Critical degree is when it's 0 or 30 degrees right on that critical degree going into the new sign. So it's kind of like not quite in yet. It's 0 degrees. So it's just left the prior sign. In this case, and just so you know, on this side here, the green planets are transit, the blue are his, in the chart here, they're black, but the blue are his natal, what he's born with. This is the blueprint of his life. This here is what was going on at the time he committed these murders. Now, the Mars 0 degree, 1 degree, actually 0.1 in retrograde. So what's it doing? It's going back. It's going back into an old idea. So that retrograde actually was going from Aquarius. And you know what's interesting is, if you remember, he said this a couple times, if only I had gone to the game Saturday night. He said that in a few of his conversations with the police and the law enforcement. He said, I could have changed the course of the destiny there. And he didn't use that word, I'm using it. But look at how this was on the 13th, guys. He could have made that decision, because there's his luck. That Mars was it was coming over, and he went the other way. He went into the dark side, and it went into that was coming back into his 9th house. So when we look at, 8th house. So when we look at it, sorry, I'm getting this all wrong. I'm sorry. This is by house. This is by sign. It was coming back and influencing. It was being influenced by his natal here, his natal fantasy, right? His life fantasy. And there's Saturn impacting his life, but also that Saturn impacted Shanann's life. It ended her life. And notice how they're both in retrograde. So it was coming back. And look here, Mars retrograde. All of these planets here are retrograde. Now, let me give you an example of retrograde. Retrograde is not necessarily bad. It actually makes it stronger behind the scenes. So it's almost like, in this case, the pull to go back and do something would be stronger than the pull to do the right thing. So his Jupiter here, which is lucky, his Mars was almost at his Jupiter. He almost made it into, I'm going to make a different decision. I'm going to end this affair. He looked at that and said, yeah, and then it just pulled him back in this way. Now, that doesn't take away any of the isms that he might have had. But what it does do here is it does give you this idea that when we look at his chart, he had a lot of indications that were taking him in that direction, that he had choices here. One of the things I love about astrology, glasses are coming on. One of the things I love about astrology is we get to see how the energy is moving. That doesn't mean it's going to be the definite outcome. It just means that's what's indicated here. Now, if you get that, what I'm trying to say is there was no, he had choices here at any given time. And I think the one to me that's the most telling is that Mars transiting his chart was going from his fame, if you will, his Jupiter luck it was coming off it and taking him into the dark side. So I hope this has given you a little bit of light into Mr. Watts. I think the saddest thing is that this lifetime for him, his sun in his first house, when it's in your first house of Aries, it's about you. And unfortunately, he really tried to be generous, if you look at it this way, but he really had some secrets that he was not willing to reveal. I think this guy had a really, really dark imagination. I do think after looking at his chart that he was definitely on a road to killing, whether it was going to be Shanann or it was going to be NK. And the reason I say this is the egg had already cracked. There was already in this chart, there's already indications of something really bad coming to this guy and to his family. And the thing about this is that, and why do I say NK? And a lot of people will disagree with me on this, but in his second interview, he had said, well, I kind of wish she had offered to pay. And I'm paraphrasing. Now, some people will say that he was just being cheap or he didn't want Shanann to find out. I'm thinking that was showing that he was starting to resent that he was doing in his world everything for her. He was at her house all the time. He was in her world. He was being sucked in once again to a woman's world that he did not want to be in. But look at his 12th house. He's all about like getting sucked into something. And that was all karmic stuff. So at the end of the day, the only break he could have made was from his mother but he never made that break. He was always joined to his mother. Even though he pulled away, he never got away. So if you really look at that, that was never allowed for him. So when we look at that little break of him saying, I wish she had paid, it was the first indication that something was wrong and with NK. And even him saying, I had to talk her off the ledge. The thing you want to know about this is this guy, he was only going to crack again. So whether it was Shanann or the next woman, I want to say that I feel that Shanann's illnesses were more severe than we thought. And I also feel that, you know, she was really a trooper. I can't say much more about it than that. And there's a reason I didn't pull up her chart, because I just feel like this is right now about the energy I'm seeing around him and the choice he made, And when you look at that Mercury, okay, in Taurus, he made that decision and he didn't make it from the strongest of places. Look how it is a direct opposition to his Pluto. In English, remember, Pluto is major. It can be major catastrophe. It's like the phoenix, right? It just gets destroyed and it rises from the ashes. That was his whole life. His brain, his mind was always opposing what was going on, in a sense. So he was always going to be with that opposition, and his thoughts were probably a lot more destructive than he ever voiced. So that said, I am looking forward to hearing your comments. Please remember that if you like this video, to give it a thumbs up. That really does help the channel. Please comment. I want to hear what you have to say. But remember, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it mean. And remember, anything political, even if you mention the current president's name, you will not be on the feed. It automatically will take you off. So remember, if you want to say something, don't add a link, because if you put a link on, that also gets blocked, because I'm finding that there are too many people putting like conspiracy theory links up. So I kind of took it off. So what I want to say is, remember, say what you mean what you say, but don't say it mean. And if you attack me or someone else, it's an automatic block. I don't want to block you. So remember, your comments are always welcome. Your opinions are welcome when they are adult and that you have decorum and you are civil to each other. I love you, love you, love you. Mean it. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to see Mr. Watt's astrology chart, I'll be doing some other things with some other things to look at energetically. But I want to remind you, no matter what I say or do with cards or with astrology, these are just energies. These are not written in stone. This is not a definite, this is what's going to happen. And one other thing I want to say about astrology is the very first Pope, his walking cane actually had all of the astrology signs etched into it, because in those days they followed the stars, they followed it. And remember that the three wise men came on certain dates and certain times. So a lot of this is actually tied into our personal and spiritual journey. And I really want to say, I'm so glad you guys are here. I look forward to the next time with you, and please post your comments. Can't wait to hear them.